Hi everyone, my name is Carla Rylance. I'm an XDS Advisory Committee member and member of the External Development Intelligence team at EA. Today I'm honoured to welcome two prominent diversity and inclusion advocates to the stage in a conversation encompassing allyship in external development. Now more than ever, we could all use an ally, whether that be in our personal lives, in our virtual office environments, or with our partners all around the world. And already in my conversations with this knowledgeable pair, I have learned so much about becoming a better ally myself. And so I'm very excited that their experience is finally being shared with this fantastic audience. So I hope you enjoy this. If you have any questions, please submit them via the Q&A portion of this live feed, and we'll get to them after the session. But for now, please welcome to the stage Nikki Roth and Cornell Verdea-Woodson.
Thank you, Carla. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It means a lot that you are here and that you are taking the time to discuss allyship. Being an ally does not mean you are perfect. In a world that is definitely not perfect, being an ally is showing up. So again, thank you for showing up today. Allyship is a sensitive topic that many of us struggle with. How do I say the right thing? What can I do as an ally? What should I not do? And it can be uncomfortable because being an ally often means addressing the elephant in the room when no one else will. Today, we are going to confront that discomfort and have an honest conversation about diversity and inclusion. By we, I do mean with you, the audience. This is meant to be a discussion. But first, I'd like to start with a fireside chat to help get a dialogue going and then open it up to you all for questions. So I'll introduce myself, and then I'd like to introduce my guest. I'm Nikki Roth, a senior technical artist at Google, co-chair of our AR Women Employee Resource Group, and co-founder of our AR Allies ERG. I'm very passionate about creating a culture of belonging where everyone can bring their whole self to work, which is why I'm thrilled to introduce my guest and colleague, Cornell Verdea-Woodson. Cornell, founder of Brave Trainings LLC, is a diversity business partner at Google. He has been engaged in social justice for 13 years and has worked for profit, nonprofit, and educational organizations. Cornell is currently working on his doctorate at USC in organizational change and leadership. I first connected with Cornell after Chris, our wonderful XDS organizer, recommended his GDC workshop titled Learn to Build a Workplace Culture of Belonging and Be a Better Ally. As I was starting to build this talk, I reached out to Cornell to ask him questions about allyship and his workshop. Our conversation was so genuine and so passionate. I wanted to just keep asking questions, and it quickly became clear that this is the talk. So it's been an absolute pleasure to work with Cornell. Although this may not be his typical interactive and comprehensive workshop, I hope that today's discussion will invite you to join the conversation. So without further ado, Cornell Verdea-Woodson, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That was such a good intro. I loved it. It's usually awkward hearing my bio read, but that felt so comfortable.
Amazing. We want this to be comfortable. This is a safe space.
Exactly.
Great. So we put together an agenda to guide the conversation. And I think the easiest place for us to start is going to be just with what allyship is. Then we can get into what does it mean to be an ally as an individual, as a company, and for this group in particular, as a partner. And then to ground us, we can bring it all together with why allyship is important. So there's allyship, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, intersectionality. There are a lot of words surfacing around allyship. So let's start with that terminology. How would you define allyship? What is allyship?
Yeah, I think when we think about allyship, we have to think about it in two different boxes, right? Because I think that people are performing allyship authentically, and then there's also this performative allyship. Authentic allyship is really about the active and consistent practice of challenging the status quo, right? And it's an ongoing, lifelong commitment to constantly doing the work of creating systemic change that helps to uplift marginalized voices that have been marginalized for generations and decades, right? And then you also have performative allyship, which is really centering the organization or the person who is seeking to be an ally. It's centering them and their image in the action. So, for example, you have companies that will post, make external statements about their dedication to diversity. But when you look internally, there's nothing that shows that commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion because they're not even focused on the work internally, but they're showing it outside. I think another way in which it shows up also is when, every Pride Month, every company turns their logo to the Pride flag. But when you look at, again, the engagement surveys or the way in which their LGBTQIA plus employees are experiencing the workplace, they don't match, right? So I sent out a message. I want you to know that, or I want to give the perception that I'm with you all, when in reality, I'm not doing the authentic work of making systemic change.
So performative allyship tends to be that surface level action that's not very helpful. It could actually be harmful.
Exactly.
How can I ensure that, so as an individual, how can I ensure that my practice is actively helping? What does that authentic allyship look like?
Yeah, I think it's really any action that you take has to be, in my opinion, risk taking, right? That I am in spaces. So, for example, some people will say, okay, I want to go to the Women's March, right? Because I want to be an ally. I want to show up. I want to be there and show them that I care and that I'm ready to stand with them. And that's great. But where I really need men, for example, when it comes to women's issues, is with other men talking about sexism and sexual harassment and things of that sort. Because in those spaces, you have risk of being ostracized by that group, right? It's uncomfortable in some way, right? And so it's easy for you to come to the Women's March and be around other people who get the issue. And so there's no real risk that you're taking there. But when you have to actually bring up these issues with people who may not actually agree with you, that's where the work is really being done, because you're helping to spread the news and the knowledge about why this is an issue and why people need to be involved in dismantling these systems.
Right. It's definitely important to know and practice when to stand up, but then there's also acknowledging when to stand to the side or pass the mic. So how would I show up as an ally in a way like that's a very sensitive, that's where it gets really sensitive. Like how can I show up as an ally in a way that isn't remarginalizing the group that I'm trying to support? When is it appropriate for an ally to be the loudest voice?
Yeah, such a great question, Nikki. And I think the difference is really so being an ally is not doing work on behalf of a group, right? It's partnering with the group. So as a man who is cisgendered, I am not trying to save women, right? That's not what we're doing here. I am partnering with women. I am following the lead of women in their own liberation. And so again, what that looks like is that I'm not at the, meeting around, with women, telling women how they need to, what they need to do, and let's do this, let's do that. I'm saying, hey, I'm here to be used, and let me know what I can do and support. But in the meantime, I'm going to be out talking to other men, whether it's, in the barbershop. I don't have hair, I know. But when I used to go to the barbershop, right, I'd go to the barbershop and talk to men in the barbershop about sexism and bring the conversation up with them. But I'm always taking the lead and making sure I'm continuing to educate myself around the issues and how to talk about the issues. And that's directly coming from the women who are leading the movement. Super, super critical. I think the other thing is really about being open to not just pointing out other people's faults, but also always looking internally about ways in which you're also perpetuating these systems of oppression. So, and that's where the real discomfort comes from, right? Because we're really good at going, yeah, he's the bad one or she's the bad one. It's like, but you also could be perpetuating these systems. The other thing I want to mention too, and I know I'm going on and on about it, I love this topic so much, is that this allyship is not about good or bad, right? All of us, I've been doing the work for 13 years, and I too have to be challenged on my behavior and the language I use, right? And so that's where that lifelong commitment to growth really matters. And that's why the internal reflecting on your own behaviors and actions is so critical.
Yeah, I think it's really important that in that internal reflection, and I think it's also important that companies do that, which kind of brings me back to the performative allyship. So we've seen many companies make these external statements, which may not accurately reflect their internal efforts. There's been a lot of controversy around this. So what's your take on performative allyship at the company level? Like, how have companies perpetuated performative allyship?
I think it's very similar to what we're seeing with individuals, right? I do believe that companies really do want to do the right thing. I have to believe that. It's the only way I get out of bed, right? It's to believe that people have good intent, but oftentimes are not aware of the ways in which to do that and what that really looks like, right? And so, for example, if you're not looking internally, similar to the individual, right? If you're only focusing on getting the message out externally and letting people know, hey, don't boycott us because we're one of the good ones, or come to us because we're one of the good ones, that becomes a financial transaction, right? Because at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're trying to get people to come and support your organization by showing that you're in alignment with them. And that's about getting their money, in my opinion. But when I look at an organization's message externally, I immediately want to go look at the news and see how they've been in the news for their own policies, processes, and practices. I want to interview their employees and ask you, what is it like for you to work at this X company, and see if I'm hearing similar messages to this external support that we're seeing, internally. That's super, super critical. And without the internal work, your external message really doesn't impress me, to be honest with you.
Totally agree. And it really also helps to improve retention and just create that workplace of belonging that we keep, that is so important. So to help improve the system, companies must find these ways to influence their workplace culture and, more importantly, create accountability. Yeah. What should companies be doing to exhibit true, authentic allyship?
Yeah, so I'm gonna sound like a bit of a broken record here, but you got to start within, right? I'd much rather an organization, particularly in times of racial injustice and the #MeToo movement, I'd rather you release a statement saying our commitment to these issues starts internally, and we are doing a deep dive review and audit of how women or people of color or LGBTQ people or veterans or people with disabilities, we're looking at how our employees are experiencing our workplace. And we're committing ourselves to creating policies and practices that are that center the most marginalized. And that should be the statement. That's the statement that shows support of the communities, but also says that we're doing the work internally first. That's the hardest part, because what it means is looking at yourself in the mirror and recognizing areas where you haven't gotten it right. And that can be very scary, uncomfortable, and really hard to digest, because we all believe that we're really good people and we're all doing the best that we can. And so knowing and realizing that we've made some mistakes really is uncomfortable. But it really does start there. And then moving the needle there, that is the ultimate indicator, in my opinion, that a company really does value diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging.
Yeah, I agree. That definitely shows a lot of that sharing of the emotional labor that it takes to make that kind of change.
Yes.
That's definitely great. Okay, so how can we apply this for our audience to external partnerships? So if we kind of think about these last two questions, how have companies perpetuated performative allyship in their partnerships, and what should they be doing to exhibit true, authentic allyship in their partnerships?
Such a good question, and I know we came up with these together, but I love them. So I think it's one thing. So when we're looking at your allyship, we're looking at it across all your actions and all your endeavors and behaviors. So it's one thing for a company to say, hey, we're doing this work internally. This matters to us. We're auditing ourselves. We're holding people accountable. But then you go and you partner with external, these external partners and other organizations that aren't aligned with that vision and mission, right? If companies can truly say that DEI is woven into the fabric of their being, then it has to show up in every decision that they make, which means that there are some companies you shouldn't be partnering with. I know that's hard to swallow, and people are like, yeah, but Cornell, that it is what it is, right? We have to hold people accountable by saying, if you don't align with how our values and our morals and our ethics, we can't possibly do business together, right? And how are we being models and thought leaders to those institutions to say, this is what we need from you in order for a criteria for us to build a partnership, for you to show a commitment and do the work around making sure that your organization internally is doing what it has to do to be to develop a culture of belonging.
Yes, yes. I could ask you questions all day. Just yes. Okay, but we've come to the last question. So to bring this conversation full circle, we've talked about what allyship is and how to be an ally. Now that we have that what and clear actions for how, why? Why is allyship important?
It's important for the most important thing to say here is because it's the right thing to do, right? Like that to me is the ultimate thing. It's the right thing to do. Who doesn't want to come to work or invest in brands that see them, that validate them, right? There's a study that was done by McKinsey & Company over the last number of years, I think 2014 to 2019, that showed that higher levels of diversity and belonging had a direct impact on the ability for a company to be innovative, the ability for a company to reach new markets and new customers, because there is the diversity that is able to help connect them to those customers. And they also do better compared to their peers from a financial success standpoint. So it's showing that the more diversity we have is impacting the businesses by bottom line, right? So if for those out there who need the business case for belonging and allyship, there it is. The numbers don't lie. The research is not lying that diversity has an impact on how successful an organization can be. And who doesn't want to be as successful as possible and reach new markets? But ultimately, I want you to do it because it's the right thing to do, right? That everyone has the opportunity, the equitable opportunity to just exist, to just be, and not have the fear of constantly having to look over their shoulder and embrace for the microaggressions or the bias that is presented to them day after day.
Yeah, that belonging. I earlier we've talked before, in times that we've talked before, I remember you saying how belonging is a step further than inclusion. And so really bringing that sense of belonging, and then all those perspectives, you get all those perspectives of making your product better, more inclusive, and just kind of being able to reach all these different cultures and communities.
Absolutely.
So we've covered a lot today. I think it's been an amazing conversation so far. So my takeaways from this, and our takeaways from this, and the takeaways that we'd like the audience to take away, is how allyship requires constant and consistent action. Feel free to jump in and speak further on any of this, but it is this constant and consistent. It's something that's just every day, all the time.
And ongoing, even when it's uncomfortable. That's key for me, Nikki, is that when people get uncomfortable, that's when you see them back away. It's no, that's where I need you. And that's when I need you the most, because this work is hard. It's difficult. And people of color, women, people with disabilities, we've been doing this work since we've been born, and it's uncomfortable for us too. You should be with us, right? And so even when it's uncomfortable, it should be constant and consistent.
Exactly. Yeah, that's how we started. It's addressing the elephant in the room when no one else will. And then another takeaway is how being an ally does not mean you are perfect. It's a practice, right? It's something that we're all doing together, and that you have to try to succeed, and you may try and fail, but you have to try to succeed.
Exactly. And, I love this point, because oftentimes when I work with clients and other people, they say, well, I just don't want to get it wrong, or I don't want to further marginalize. And I love that. I appreciate that. But if you're waiting to be perfect, then you'll never get started. Again, 13 years ago of starting this work, I was not perfect. I'm still not perfect. And I didn't know all there was to know. And I still don't know all there is to know. I had to dive in order to learn more and to figure out how to navigate these spaces. So we don't need your perfection. We need your energy and your action.
Yeah, and I've definitely made mistakes, but I feel that with every mistake, I've learned so much, and I've become a better and better ally because of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So And then being an ally does not always mean being the loudest. It just means showing up, means being there, and understanding when to speak up or when to let them speak.
Absolutely, right. And just knowing when what I always tell people is that women don't need men to speak for them. They need us to get out their way, right? People of color don't need white people to speak for them. We need you to get out of our way, to allow us to be leaders, to allow us to step up and use our own voices.
Yeah, and there's a lot of times when I'll be speaking to other women and it's just like preaching to the choir. It's more, we need men here to understand this, or allies, and in general, just to kind of be able to understand when they can step up and when they can speak up for it.
Exactly.
And speaking of needing allies, we need allies to share the emotional labor of making change. You've said this time and time again. It's uncomfortable, it's hard, it's difficult, and it's emotional.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that we have to share in that labor of handling that, right? So when women and people of color and trans people and people with disabilities, they can go and rest and focus on their own healing, right? And then those of us of the privileged identity can show up to say, give me the baton, I'll take it from here, right? But particularly where the emotional labor really matters is in rooms and spaces where we don't exist, right? So in the boardroom, in the C-suite, right? In those meetings where women don't exist, right? How are you bringing up and advocating for these groups and asking the hard question of, why don't we have more women in this room right now? Where are the people of color, right? When you do that, you're causing everyone else to think, right? And hopefully action will ensue because of you challenging the status quo.
Totally. Exactly. And then to that point of asking the questions and looking internally and looking around, companies must start internally before making public declarations.
It's key. It's key. You got to have your own house in order before you can start, pointing fingers at everyone else. It's super critical because what it shows is that you're really dedicated to looking in the mirror, to doing the hard work of acknowledging that you have been a part of this oppression, whether intentionally or intentionally. We have to follow suit with that. And then and only then can you start going, hey, we're doing the work, right? So again, I would rather companies not release statements or release a statement saying our commitment to this is that we need to do our work internally and here's what we're going to start doing.
Well, thank you so much, Cornell, for having this conversation with me. I feel like I've learned a lot. I hope the audience has learned a lot. And I want to open this up to the audience and really start the conversation with them, give them time to ask questions and just continue the conversation. Because I feel like I could talk to you all day about this. So
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Nikki. This was great.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for that discussion. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I would love to welcome back Nikki Roth and Cornell Vadea Woodson to the chat. Get your Q&A questions in. We've got a few already, which is fantastic. I'm going to kick off quickly with one of these that I have already. So can you tell me about a time when someone came through as an ally for you? We'll open it up to Cornell first. Thank you.
Yeah, there have been multiple times when someone has showed up as an ally for me. I think the one that has happened most recently is, with everything that's going on in the US and really globally, I've had many of my friends and even newfound colleagues who just reached out and said, hey, you don't have to answer this question or even respond to me. I just want to say I'm here if you need anything, whatever that may look like for you. And that was such a great opportunity to know that I have support, but not feel the pressure to have to answer or to have to teach people, right? And it was very personalized as well. So that's one example I can think of that happened most recently.
That's a great example when they just kind of offer it to you and kind of just let you know that they're there for you. I think that's great. I remember there was one time where we had a leader come and talk to our team, and it was a woman leader, and she recognized that I was the only woman in the room and of a team of like maybe 20. And she specifically called out, like, the next person we hire will be another woman. Like, we definitely recognize, and we want to make sure that we're encouraging more diversity with this in this team. And so, like, just I always am really inspired by leaders who are that aware as well.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It makes a massive difference. We've got some amazing questions coming in. So I am going to go in with some of the top votes. So here we go. I'm going to have to lean close in because of my eyes. How should developers and publishers approach auditing their current external partners for authentic allyship? And that's from Dave at Phoenix Labs.
Yeah, I think you have to really be intentional about asking a lot of questions, right? Asking what are they currently doing internally and brand wise to show their support, right? Because a lot of companies, as we, you heard through that recording, are sending a lot of external messages out, right? To posture that, hey, we're one of the good ones. I often want to know, what are you doing internally for your employees? How are you showing up in that way for as you're, promote and advance and hire underrepresented voices? And then also within your product, how are you advocating for underrepresented voices as well? Usually the answers to those questions give me a strong sense of how authentic and how deeply rooted their investment is in diversity, equity, and inclusion.
I totally agree. It's definitely looking at the programs you offer, the type of roles that you offer. So our team even has a diversity and inclusion project manager who is focused on trying to create these types of programs and trainings and creating a community and awareness. And so I think it's looking at the type of how you're investing internally in your team culture, in your team, and then in those team resources.
And the other thing I would add to that is we're not talking about perfection either, right? So as you're auditing potential partners, it's not about looking for them to have gotten it right. It's really just hearing how they talk about the work. You can tell when someone, is really authentically passionate about something. You hear it in their tone, you see it in their body language. You might have seen it in that video, the way Nikki and I were talking about this topic. You could tell that there was true, authentic passion about this. And it's the same thing when you're auditing those partners. Again, it's not about perfection, but even when they say, hey, we haven't gotten this right, what are they saying, after that? We haven't gotten this right, but here's what we're doing to try to fix it. Here's what we're doing to learn. Those are really key flags for me that show that they're authentic about it.
Yeah, not just asking, I kind of took that as like auditing yourself, but auditing partners, asking those same questions. Like, what kind of programs do you offer? What kind of roles do you have that are focused on these initiatives? And what kind of steps are you taking if you don't have them to add to get that?
Yes.
Absolutely. Perfect. Thank you very much for that. We'll move on to the next question. How can a company headquartered in the US, for example, be inclusive of teams and studios in other countries when those countries might have their own nuanced D&I challenges to overcome? And that's from our Chris at XDS.
Yeah.
That's a great question. I think one place to start is to definitely lead by example. We touched a little bit on this in our conversation, but one is simply like making sure when you're booking meetings with them or when you're discussing with them that you're providing both time zones and being just inclusive of where they're at. So like you provide, when we work with partners, we provide our time zone and their time zone so they don't have to do the calculations in their head. And you try to book meetings that are taking into account both people's time. So kind of like showing by awareness is one step, and just kind of thinking about where they're at. And then the cultural is definitely an interesting one to get into, of maybe just like doing some research. You can either ask them directly and kind of understand what are some of those nuances with their culture that they that they're kind of more in tune with or expecting, or maybe like ask around with other people who've worked with people in the same area or culture. And there's definitely, it's just becoming more aware and learning and trying to find ways to educate yourself and then think about and then reference that when you're interacting with them.
Absolutely. Plus one to that, I think it's really important for particularly companies that are based in the U.S. to really understand the regions that they're in. And this is where another way in which you can tell whether a company is very much authentically dedicated to understanding DEI, because no region is the same. And while there will be many similarities to the DEI issues that each of our regions face, there are those nuances, those differences. So for example, in a place like the Netherlands, it may not necessarily be race that we're talking about, but it may be cultural background, religion. In India, it's caste system, right? And so it's really building up the awareness of understanding what is the history of that space and the people who live in that space and how they relate to one another, to really make sure that we're developing unique and localized strategy to our DEI strategy, that there is no one size fits all, that there are threads, but there are many differences that we have to focus on and building a unique strategy for that region. There's just no other way around it.
Totally agree. There's all the little things like the holidays and just kind of there's so many different cultures too, but again, they bring so many perspectives. So that's like the benefit to it. But with each culture, I think just asking and being more upfront about them with maybe either asking what kind of challenges they have or what kind of how you could help. Like, I think that would help them understand that you care, that you're interested, that, you could even offer some things that your team is working. And it's a conversation, right? Like, that's why we want to frame this as a discussion, because it's not this, like, no one has the perfect solution and no one has that strategy up front. You have to really develop it together and kind of understand where those key nuances are.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Just to note, Caroline just asked a question which is very similar to the one that Chris asked. I hope that our team here answered that question for you and that you're happy. We'll move on to the next question here. So how would you suggest a young person start the conversation about allyship within a company that they're fairly junior in, with senior co-workers? How would you go about those discussions?
I think for me, it's starting off with finding who my allies are, right? Finding people in the company across levels who share in the passion and desire to develop allyship in a space of belonging. Starting there is always super helpful, as opposed to, just kind of jumping into the deep end and hoping that you're reaching the right people. But, through that, it's asking a lot of questions and bringing up certain things that matter most to you. So when I join a new company, or have in the past when I was more junior, I asked certain questions, right? And talking to different types of people, I get to see where they are and how they're thinking about it. And I develop a sense of, hey, you're someone who I can connect with on this topic. You're someone that might not. So I'm going to, not that I won't ever engage with you, but I might not engage with you on this topic because I'm not sure where you stand on that. But really knowing who your allies are, but also starting with people who are I hate using the term on your level, but other junior folks, and building your community there, and really utilizing the resources that exist within the company through human resources. And if the company has a DEI team, there's usually a place where who's showing up to the trainings, who's showing up to the programs. And that's how you can really begin to identify the folks who you can have a conversation with. I imagine that the question is coming out of a space where the company doesn't have this infrastructure. So you really got to dig a little bit deeper to find out, how do I know who I can go to? And there's no one size fits all answer to that question. I think it's really starting off with articulating that it matters to you, and bringing those things up, asking how the company understands this topic is usually a great way to indicate who you can talk to. But at the heart of it, it's asking a lot of questions and engaging with different people within those questions to get a sense of where you can go.
I think another interesting way to approach it is to understand, like, what you're trying to what conversation you want to have about allyship. So when you're approaching these senior coworkers, is it to ask them how you can get involved? Is it to ask them more about understanding allyship? Is it to ask them, for resources so that you can drive something or get involved? So I think it's like really understanding what that ask is, and then you can go in with a more, and then they can help you really direct you in a way that might be more helpful for both parties. And so not just being like, hey, do you know about allyship, or what's allyship? But like, that's a good place to start. But I think if you can come up with like, I'm really passionate about allyship, and I see that we have a lot of room to grow. I'd like to start a group, or I'd like to like create resources that I can share, or I'd like to get resources. Do you know where I can find them? Or, is this, and really understanding like, what do you want? How do you want to, like, what are you asking for, and how do you want to step up?
Yeah.
Great stuff. Thank you so much to Eric for that question. The next question we have on the list, and please keep feeling free to add more questions into the Q&A. We've got lots of lovely time to dedicate to this. So thanks for the questions so far. Can you remark on your experiences and understandings of how to make a high pressure interpersonal workplace functional and welcoming to autistic and neurodiverse individuals in particular? Thank you.
Nikki, do you want to go first, or?
Sure, that's a really great question. I think it's it's definitely about, like, my head first goes to environment, and creating an environment that is welcoming, because then it's also making that space that they can be comfortable, that they're, and I wish I knew more about like what that space would entail, but I think, that's where I can go and educate myself on this afterwards. But I think starting with the space and creating a space where they feel comfortable, and also thinking about the things that might make them functional. Like, I know in our products, we do a lot of thinking about people who might be motion sensitive or who might have other disabilities. And we definitely try to design our products with that in mind. So I think you could even think about designing your workplace with that in mind, of those disabilities, and making sure it's accessible, and making sure that it's providing comfort, and definitely asking if there are any individuals in particular that you have on your team, like asking what would help you make your workplace, like help you work better, and make it, and then also providing a lot of forums. That wasn't a great transition, but providing a lot of forums of like ways to communicate, whether it's in a chat, in an email, in one-on-one, in an anonymous forum. Maybe that's like somewhere where they feel more comfortable, or and just like having a place where that discussion can happen, or that feedback can come, that can surface easily.
Yeah, I think awareness building. So this is what I do for a living. I do this, and I did this at a company called Looker that was recently acquired by Google, where I was the head of diversity. And one of our pillars was focusing on how do we create a space for neurodiverse individuals, because we had several employees who identified as neurodiverse. And one of my colleagues talked about, for me, being neurodiverse means that, like, if I'm working on a project, you can't just randomly come over to me and interrupt me working on that project, because you throw me off for the rest of the day. Or when you tell me that this is how we're going to do things, and then tomorrow you change it, you throw me off, because I took you literally and I understood that this is where we were going, and you just ripped the rug from under me of how I understood how I needed to operate. And so it's really making people aware of what it means to be neurodiverse. What is the diversity within the neurodiverse community, right? Because there's no one size fits all narrative either. Neurodiverse people are not monolithic, right? And so understanding the multitude of ways in which neurodiversity shows up. So making managers preparing them with the skills of what it takes to support and nurture and take care of folks who are neurodiverse, and everyone really, but making sure that they have the skill set needed in order to create the space for people to be able to thrive and get what they need, in order to do so. One of the things that we did at Looker, or we're thinking about doing at Looker before we were acquired, was really looking at little light bulbs on the desk, right? And so red means like, nope, you cannot bother me right now. And green meant like, hey, come on over. Headphones on means like, this is not the good time. And those were indicators that communicated to other folks like, hey, so-and-so, this isn't a good time to bother them. So it's really understanding what is needed, right? What are those unique needs, providing the skill set that people need in order to create that space. But it's also, and I hate this conversation, but the business case, right? How does creating a space for neurodiversity or neurodiverse people to thrive, how does that make our business better? Right. And not just from a dollar and cents perspective, but just from an overall cultural perspective, belonging perspective, and how that impacts how people show up in the workplace. I find leaders need to understand that full picture so that it makes sense, and then it allows them to act on it as well.
You had me stumble through that answer just so you could mic drop afterwards, didn't you? But I think that was great. I just learned so much just through that. But I think one thing to add would be the creating the awareness, and then also how you communicate to your team that there are people, why you're putting these measures in place, and why you're taking these steps or making this effort, and kind of helping them understand what those protocols are and what everything means, and how you can be a helpful teammate, so that it's really helping with that sense of belonging, and letting everyone know that letting everyone know that like we're all trying to help and want to make it an inclusive place for everyone.
And Nikki, you really brought something that really resonates with me. Oftentimes, people fear outing themselves, whether it's being neurodiverse or having a disability or anything that it may be. And so I like to, when I think of inclusive planning, I'm preparing this environment for anyone to be able to exist within it, so that someone doesn't have to say, hey, I'm neurodiverse, or I, have this, identity, and I need the following things, because most likely a lot of people will not tell you out of fear of what that means when they out themselves. And so how do we from the get-go create these kind of spaces so that no matter who shows up in this space, there's a way for everyone to be themselves and work the way they need to work, and be as successful as they possibly can be.
Lovely. Thank you so much. That's excellent stuff. We have another question here from Eric. How do you handle people not having nuanced vocabularies about this topic?
I love this question. Patience is a virtue. I've never understood that phrase more than doing this work, right? I am keenly aware that when, I engage with someone on this topic, that I cannot expect that everyone knows exactly what I know, right? I've made the intentional effort to educate myself on the jargon and the language that is of the diversity field, right? And it's like any other field, right? You can't expect people to know everything. And so I try to be as patient as I possibly can to educate, help point them towards resources as well. And particularly when you're in a situation where someone uses a term that is problematic or offensive, right? Our gut reaction is to go, oh, you used that word and that's offensive and that's this. And it's like, whoa, I didn't know, right? And so it's really important for me. I go, why that word? Or why that phrase? Or why that question? And a lot of times people go, I didn't, what's wrong? Is there a problem? Oh, actually, so that word actually can be offensive to this community and things of that sort, and use it as an opportunity for them to grow. But being aware that not everyone knows. After 13 years of doing this work, do not know all there is to know, right? And so I'd want someone to be patient with me as well. And so I want to extend that patience as well to others so that they can grow too.
Yeah, I think patience is a big one. And I'm going to go back to the lead by example type of thing, point and practicing, because, simply one thing that I've had to practice and what's helped me practice it is even just with referring to my partner. I used to just by default refer to my husband, but partner is more inclusive. And I've been around a lot of other people who have been using partner. And so I see them use it. It helps me remember I should use it. And so I've been able to integrate that into my vocabulary. And there's a lot of other similar examples of just kind of, trying to surround yourself by people who are also trying to use that vocabulary, or going out and researching it and then practicing it. But yeah, the more you hear it, the more you read it, you'll start to think about it. It'll come up a little bit more regularly, and you'll actually be able to start practicing it.
Mm-hmm. Lovely. Thank you very much. I just want to put a last call out for questions. Get them in if you can. I've got a question here which I think would be very interesting to hear about. What data can we gather and analyze to inform and understand representation gaps?
Yeah. I think it's really important to know how people identify. And I know that is a very touchy subject, right? People fearing, what are you going to do with that information? And why does that matter? Why are you putting me into a box? And things of that sort. And I think, unfortunately, because we're not quite at a space where equity and belonging exists broadly right now, we've got to pay attention to the nuanced ways in which different identity groups experience a particular space. So many companies will ask people to self-identify themselves, their race, their gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, whether they're a parent, a veteran, a guardian, things of that sort. And I think collecting that information is really, really key to beginning to understand how are we doing in terms of how we hire, who we lose, right, through attrition, who we promote, and a whole host of other things, and being able to splice that data by representation to note that, oh, wow, while men of color may be doing really well, women of color actually are struggling, right? And so being able to break that data down in that way really helps us get down to some of the really deep-rooted problems that aren't so clear at the surface. So really asking people to identify, and then having a plan for how that data will be used, I think is super critical to any DEI strategy.
Yeah, I agree. Really trying to provide that intersectionality of not just polling for women and male or women and men, but also like women of color, men of color, and any other type of intersectionality that you'd want to include in that, to really help find those smaller gaps that might not be as obvious, or that might get filtered in a different way than you would expect. I think another way to really try to gather the data is to do it, sometimes to get like a read on your team. Like, I know our team has what they call, or Google does, like mini Geist and like bigger Google Geist, and they're basically trying to read the team culture and the workplace environment. And that's another time to really like put in that point of data and let your audience know why you're polling and why you're looking for this information. Of that, we're trying to understand where we're at in our diversity and how we can improve and where our gaps are, and being open about that, because then that'll let them know, and also let them feel comfortable about being open and truthful in their responses.
Yes, Nikki, I love that you just said that. The communication piece of it is so critical. I think there are so many organizations that don't help people understand, why are you asking me this question? Because there are some people who, due to having privilege, don't have to think about those identities. So to them, it's completely foreign as to why you need to know that identify in these ways. Education is super key, awareness building, communication. Why are we doing this? What are you going to do with it? What does it mean? And things that it's really helpful. The more you change management 101 is how you bring people along versus dragging them along, right? And a part of that is communicating and creating a partner in them, and getting that buy-in. So that is a key part of helping to address representation through collecting data. Love that.
Yeah, I think that's just kind of a big theme to take away in general, is it's about like creating awareness, and then how you communicate that awareness and your intention behind that awareness of, we want to make a better place. We want to be inclusive. But first we need to understand where we're at, so that we can figure out where we need to go and what we need to do.
and you have to actually do it too. Because I've seen a lot of organizations that do a great job at collecting the data, but then when you say, okay, so it's been 6 years and what have you done with it? And they're like, well, and it's like, that's not good, right? So, you created the buy-in and you've gotten people to trust you by sharing their information, but then you've done nothing with it. Like, you actually have to put action behind it and really use that information and determine what the data is telling you. What is the DEI narrative that this data is telling you, and addressing the issues that show up, but also celebrating the highlights too, right? Because sometimes there's a lot of space to celebrate where we've increased in this way, and we want to point that out as well, but you really want to be putting action to the words for sure.
Yes, definitely. Celebrate the small wins and celebrate who you do have, and then trying to find, like, especially the more data points that you have and the more that you really use that, how people identify, it gives you a lot of ways to slice the data and a lot of ways to really see it from different perspectives and to look at it at different levels. And then I like your point of really using that to start driving some action items and giving yourself some metrics of what you consider success. Like, really try to challenge yourself and put in that North Star of, like, we want to get here by this time. What are the steps we can take to get there? Where can we start? And really using the data to help drive those.
Right.
Lovely. Thank you so much. I think we're about wrapped up for questions. So I just want to say a massive thank you to both Nikki and Cornell for educating us today. It's been fantastic. Everyone has loved your energy, getting lots of very positive comments in the chat.
Good.
So thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Big thanks to XDS for this, and enjoy the rest of the conference, everyone. Thank you.